What's the most humiliating thing a teacher has ever done to you? Me and my class were by the pool when the teacher asked why I wasn't getting in. I have a hearing aid, miss. I can't get in the water. Mrs. Garrett's eyes narrowed like she'd just caught me in a lie. Hearing aid? You mean cochlear implant? She said it with this weird smile, like she knew something I didn't. Yes, miss. I signed automatically before remembering she probably didn't understand. My hands dropped to my sides as I pointed at the processor attached to my head. That's the third disabled foster kid this year. The way she mumbled the word disabled made my stomach twist, like she had something planned. I pulled out the doctor's note my foster mom, Maria, had made sure I kept in my pocket. 3 different doctors had signed it explaining why I couldn't get my processors wet. Mrs. Garrett held it up to the light, squinting at every word. Real doctor's scribble. This is typed. She looked at me with this triumphant expression. Your foster mom thinks she's clever. My chest got tight. My mom knows. Your mom? She laughed, but it wasn't a nice laugh. You mean your foster mom? You've been with her what, 2 months? 3? My face burned hot. You know what's funny? Miss Garrett continued, waving my note around. Last year, I caught the Johnson family faking their kid's autism. Saved the district $50,000. Won Teacher of the Year for it. She tapped her chest where I could see a pin on her shirt. I know a fake when I see one. She paused, scanning the pool area where my classmates were frozen in place. Remember what happened to your friends last month? One complaint from me and they were expelled. A few kids stepped back. You know what? Missy Garrett pulled out her phone. Let's call your mom. Bet she doesn't even answer. Probably dropped you off and forgot you exist. Every muscle screamed at me to bolt for the door, but I couldn't move. The foster system taught me that running meant violence. Running meant getting sent back to the group homes. My heart hammered as she dialed the number on the note. She put it on speaker, holding the phone out like evidence in a court case. Maria? Miss Garrett's voice dripped fake sweetness. Your foster child is refusing to swim. Is everything okay? Samuel has medical restrictions. Before you pretend to care, Mrs. Garrett interrupted, just know that I've caught 7 fake disability notes. 7. We both know you won't fight this. He's not worth losing your foster license over. Don't touch my son's medical equipment. Maria's voice had changed. Calm but different, like when she talked to insurance companies. Mrs. Garrett actually assertive. Your son? You've known him for 8 weeks. Real mothers would be here screaming at me. You're probably at home with your real kids. She looked right at me as she said it. Go ahead, threaten to sue. We both know you won't. Foster parents never do. She hung up before Maria could respond. The silence around the pool was suffocating. Everyone was watching now. Some kids looked scared. Some looked embarrassed for me. Josh, our quarterback, shifted closer to me. That's messed up, he said quietly. Mrs. Garrett heard him. Her face got red. You know what? Let me prove she doesn't actually care. She started walking toward me, and something in her eyes made me step back. If this was her real child, would I dare do this? She grabbed my arm. Never. But it's just some foster kid she'll trade in next month. She started pulling me toward the pool. My feet slipped on the wet concrete as I tried to pull back. Josh stepped between us. Move! She snarled at him. This isn't right, Josh said, his voice steady even though I could see his hands shaking. Move! She shoved past him and grabbed me again. Is she storming in here? No, because she doesn't care. That's when she reached for my processor. I tried to duck, tried to turn my head, but her fingers caught the wire. She ripped it off my head. The pain was instant, hot and sharp where the magnetic coil tore away from my scalp, taking skin with it. I felt warm blood trickling down behind my ear. If she loved him, she'd be here by now, Mrs. Garrett said, holding my processor up like a trophy. My entire world had gone half silent, like someone had thrown a blanket over one side of my head. Her son's medical equipment? Watch this. She threw it. I watched my $8,000 processor arc through the air and splash into the pool. It sank slowly, the lights on it flickering once before going dark. I was crying, not just from the pain or the blood I could feel running down my neck, but from the words. Each one hit harder than her hands had. Suddenly, there was a boom behind us. The gym doors slammed open so hard they bounced off the walls. Maria ran in, and I'd never seen her move that fast. Her eyes went from me to the blood to my processor at the bottom of the pool, and her face changed in a way I'd never seen before. Oh, now you show up? Mr. Garrett sneered. Nice performance, but we both know after today you'll request a different placement. Maria didn't say anything at first. She came straight to me, her hands gentle as she checked my head, her fingers coming away red. She pulled tissues from her pocket, pressing them against the bleeding. I'm sorry, I signed to her, my hands shaky. No, baby. Number. She signed back, then stood up, turning to face Mrs. Garrett. Her hand came up with one finger raised and Miss Garrett's mouth snapped shut mid-word. Maria's voice came out quiet and level, the kind of calm that made my stomach flip because I'd heard it before when she dealt with my caseworker's supervisor. She told Mrs. Garrett not to say another word, not one more word, and something in her tone made Mrs. Garrett step back. Maria kept her hand on my shoulder as she guided me toward the door, and Josh appeared at my other side with his phone held up at chest level, the red recording dot visible on the screen. We walked through the hallway and kids scattered out of our path, their whispers following us like static. The nurse's office had that sharp chemical smell mixed with old paper, and Nurse Hines looked up from her desk as we entered. Her eyes went straight to my head, and she was up and moving before Maria even said anything. She pulled gloves from a box and guided me to the exam table, her fingers gentle as she tilted my head to see the wound better. The camera on her phone clicked 3 times as she photographed the bleeding and the raw spot where the magnetic coil had ripped away skin. She wrote in her log with quick, precise movements, noting the time and the visible injury and the blood that had soaked through Maria's tissues. Maria stood beside me with her hand still on my shoulder, while Nurse Hines cleaned the wound with stinging antiseptic that made me wince. My hands shook in my lap, and I couldn't make them stop. Couldn't make the half-silence in my head go away, or forget the feeling of Mrs. Garrett's fingers catching the wire. Nurse Hines pressed gauze against the wound and taped it down, then made more notes about the location and size of the injury. Maria had her phone out now, her voice shifting into that insurance tone as she called someone and started talking about documentation and medical records and incident reports. Nurse Hines was still cleaning up when Principal Hartman walked in, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Maria didn't wait for him to speak, just held out her phone showing the photos Nurse Hines had taken of my bloody head, and then swiped to show the processor sitting at the bottom of the pool. Hartman started saying something about investigating the situation and gathering all the facts, but Maria cut him off and said we were going to urgent care right now and he would be hearing from us very soon. Her voice stayed level, but I could feel the anger underneath it, controlled and sharp. Hartman nodded and said he understood, that he would begin the investigation immediately, and Maria just looked at him with an expression I couldn't read. That's when Missy Garrett appeared in the doorway, her face red and her hands moving as she tried to explain herself. She said she was enforcing pool safety, that she had to verify my disability was real because she'd caught fakes before. Maria stood up so fast her chair scraped across the floor with a sound that made everyone freeze. She told Missy Garrett that she had just committed assault on a minor and destroyed medical equipment, and if she came anywhere near her son again, she would regret it. The words came out calm and clear, but something in Maria's eyes made Mrs. Garrett take 2 steps back into the hallway. Principal Hartman positioned himself between them and suggested Missy Garrett return to her office, and she left without another word. Maria gathered her things and helped me off the exam table, thanking Nurse Hines for her documentation and asking for copies of everything. We walked out to Maria's car, and she drove to the urgent care clinic 3 blocks from the school, her hand steady on the wheel even though I could see the muscle jumping in her jaw. The urgent care waiting room smelled like hand sanitizer and old magazines, but we didn't wait long. The doctor was older with gray hair and reading glasses on a chain, and he examined my scalp with careful fingers that didn't pull or press too hard. He asked how this happened, and Maria explained everything while his expression got more and more serious, his eyebrows drawing together as she described Mrs. Garrett ripping off the processor. He made detailed notes on his tablet, typing phrases like traumatic removal of medical device and injury caused by authority figure. He cleaned the wound again and applied a better bandage, then told us the wound would heal, but I needed to see my audiologist soon to check for damage to the implant site. He printed out his notes and handed the papers directly to Maria, saying these would be important for whatever came next, and the way he said it made it clear he knew exactly what kind of situation this was. Maria thanked him, and we walked back out to the car, and I made it all the way to the passenger seat before everything hit me at once. I started crying, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and won't stop, and I couldn't catch my breath enough to explain why. Maria pulled out of the parking spot, and then immediately pulled over again 2 blocks away, turning in her seat to face me. I tried to tell her I was sorry, that I knew making a big deal about this would get me labeled as a problem foster kid, that caseworkers hated dealing with kids who caused trouble. My voice kept breaking and the words came out jumbled, but Maria waited until I finished. Then she promised me I wasn't going anywhere, that she wasn't giving up on me, that what happened today was assault, and we were going to deal with it properly. She said it wasn't my fault, and I didn't cause this, and standing up for myself wasn't being a problem. Her hands were gentle as she wiped my face with tissues from the glove box, and something in my chest loosened just a little bit. At home, Maria set me up on the couch with ice cream and a blanket, even though it wasn't cold. She disappeared into the kitchen and I could hear her voice through the doorway, using those legal terms again as she talked on the phone. She said words like documentation and Title IX and ADA violations, her voice staying calm and firm the whole time. I ate the ice cream slowly, letting it melt on my tongue, and listened to her explain what happened to whoever was on the other end of the line. She wasn't yelling or crying or threatening, just laying out facts in a way that made it clear she knew exactly what she was doing. After 3 different phone calls, she came back with a notebook and sat beside me on the couch. She explained that we needed to write down everything that happened while it was still fresh in my memory, every detail I could remember. She didn't try to write for me or tell me what to say, just asked questions when I got stuck and let me tell the story in my own words. What did Miss Garrett say first? What did you say back? Where was Josh standing? What happened right before she grabbed the processor? I wrote it all down with my hand cramping around the pen, filling page after page with the whole awful story. Maria read it over when I finished and asked a few clarifying questions, then dated it and had me sign the bottom. She put it in a folder with the medical paperwork and the photos, building some kind of system I didn't fully understand but could tell was important. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while my brain refused to shut off. The world sounded wrong with only one processor, like someone had stuffed cotton in half my head. Every sound came from the left side only, flat and off balance, making me dizzy even though I was lying down. I kept touching the bandage behind my right ear where the processor used to attach, feeling the soreness underneath. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt Miss Garrett's fingers grabbing at my head, heard her voice saying those things about Maria not caring, saw my processor sinking into the pool. My chest got tight and I had to open my eyes again, focusing on the glow from the streetlight outside my window. Around midnight, Maria knocked softly and pushed my door open, her hair in a messy bun and her laptop under her arm. She asked if I was okay, and I shook my head because lying seemed pointless. She sat on the edge of my bed and opened her laptop, turning the screen so I could see. She had already uploaded all the photos from today into a folder labeled with the date and my name. The timeline document was there too, organized by timestamps with my handwritten account typed up neatly below each entry. She showed me how she had backed everything up to 3 different places, explaining it like she was teaching me something I might need to know someday. I watched her click through the files and something in my chest loosened a little bit, seeing all of it documented and saved and treated like it mattered. The next morning, I woke up to Maria's voice downstairs, that calm insurance voice she used when she was handling business. I came down the stairs and found her at the kitchen table with her phone pressed to her ear, and she gestured for me to sit down while she finished talking. When she said the name Derek Scanlon, my whole body went cold. CPS caseworkers only called when something bad was about to happen, when placements were ending or kids were moving or someone had filed a complaint. Maria must have seen my face change because she reached across the table and squeezed my hand, then tapped her phone screen to put the call on speaker. Derek's voice came through asking if this was a good time to talk, and Maria said yes. Samuel was right here with her. My heart hammered against my ribs as Derek explained that the school had filed an incident report about what happened at the pool, and he needed to follow up as part of his regular monitoring. He asked me directly if I felt safe at home with Maria, and my voice came out shaky and small when I said yes. He asked if I wanted to stay in this placement, or if I wanted to request a change, and I said I wanted to stay here, my words getting stronger because that part was true and easy. Maria squeezed my hand again while Derek made notes on his end, the sound of his pen scratching across paper coming through the speaker. He said he was documenting this as a school safety issue, not a placement problem, and that he would be noting in his report that I expressed a clear desire to remain with Maria. After we hung up, I realized I had been holding my breath, and Maria wrapped her arms around me and told me I did good, that I spoke up for what I wanted. Maria spent the rest of the morning at her computer, and I sat at the table doing homework I had missed while she typed. She pulled up her email and started a new message to Principal Hartman, attaching the timeline document, the photos, the medical paperwork from urgent care, and the original doctor's note about my processors. She typed out a paragraph explaining what happened, and another listing the student witnesses who had been present, putting Josh's name first. Then she added 2 more email addresses in the CC line, one for Derek, and another for someone named Kenya Steele. She told me Kenya was a disability rights advocate who worked with kids in situations like mine, and that we needed people who knew the laws and systems on our side. She asked for an immediate meeting to discuss next steps and hit send, before I could second-guess whether this was the right move. My stomach twisted because part of me still worried that making noise would get me labeled as a problem kid, but Maria's face looked calm and determined like she had done this before. That afternoon, Maria's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize, and she answered it on speaker after checking the caller ID showed a local area code. A woman's voice came through introducing herself as Kenya Steele, saying she had gotten Maria's email and wanted to talk about options. Kenya asked to speak with both of us, and for the next 30 minutes she explained things about filing an Office for Civil Rights complaint with the Department of Education and making a police report for assault and destruction of medical property. She said this wasn't about getting revenge or causing trouble, but about making sure what happened to me didn't happen to another kid with a disability. She talked about documentation and timelines and witness statements, using words I only half understood, but that Maria seemed to follow completely. When Kenya asked what I wanted out of this process, I froze because no adult had ever asked me that question before. Maria waited quietly, not jumping in to answer for me, and eventually I found my voice. I told Kenya I wanted Miss Garrett away from other kids with disabilities so she couldn't do this to someone else. I wanted my processor replaced because I needed it to hear and function at the school. And I wanted to stay at this school with Josh and the other friends who had supported me, not get shuffled somewhere else because I had caused problems. Kenya said those were reasonable goals, and she could help us work toward all of them, and something clicked in my brain that maybe I actually had some power in this situation. After the call ended, Maria turned to face me fully, her expression serious but not scary. She asked me what I wanted to happen, really wanted. not what I thought I should say, or what would make things easier for everyone else. I took a breath and repeated what I had told Kenya, adding that I didn't want to be scared of teachers anymore, and I didn't want other foster kids to go through what I just went through. Maria nodded and wrote down my words exactly as I said them, telling me that my voice mattered in this process, and she would make sure people heard it. She explained that over the next few days and weeks we would be meeting with different people and filling out forms and probably repeating our story multiple times, but that she would be there for all of it. I asked if this would mess up my placement or make Derek think I was too much trouble, and Maria promised me again that I wasn't going anywhere, that standing up for myself was not the same as being a problem child. 2 days after the incident, we drove to the audiologist's office for an emergency appointment Maria had scheduled. The audiologist took one look at the healing wound behind my ear, and her face went pale. She asked what happened, and Maria explained while the audiologist examined my head with gentle fingers, tilting it to see the mark where the coil had been ripped away. She used a small light to check the implant site carefully, looking for any signs that the internal magnet had been damaged or shifted. After several minutes, she said the internal implant seemed okay, which made my shoulders drop with relief I hadn't known I was holding. But then she pulled up images of my processor on her computer screen and explained that the external processor was completely destroyed from water damage. She showed us the water damage indicators inside the casing that had turned red, proving the device had been submerged. The processor was designed to survive sweat and rain, but not full immersion, and the pool water had fried the circuits beyond repair. The audiologist pulled up my file and started making phone calls to the manufacturer while we waited in her office. She explained that getting a loaner processor would take at least a week, maybe 2, and it would probably be an older model that wouldn't have all the features my regular processor had. She printed out documentation about the cost of replacement, the itemized breakdown showing the processor alone cost $8,000, not counting the fitting and programming. She added her own professional notes to the paperwork, writing that the removal of the device was dangerous and traumatic, that cochlear implant processors should never be forcibly removed, and that doing so could have caused serious injury to the implant site. She made copies of everything and handed them to Maria in a manila folder, saying we would need all of this for insurance and legal purposes. As we left, she touched my shoulder and told me she was sorry this happened, that my equipment should have been protected and respected. 3 days after the incident, Maria and I walked into Principal Hartman's office for the meeting she had requested. The principal sat behind his desk looking uncomfortable, and beside him sat a woman in a business suit who introduced herself as the district's legal counsel. Maria shook their hands calmly, and I followed her lead, my palms sweating but my face trying to stay neutral. Maria pulled out a neat folder from her bag and placed it on the desk between us, then opened it to show our timeline, the medical documentation, the photos, and the list of student witnesses. She explained in that insurance voice that we were filing an Office for Civil Rights complaint regarding disability discrimination and ADA violations. She said we were considering filing a police report for assault and destruction of medical property, and she said we expected immediate action to ensure my safety while attending school. Her voice stayed level and professional the whole time, not angry or threatening, just stating facts like she was reading a grocery list. Principal Hartman started to say something about needing to complete their investigation before taking any action, but Maria cut him off mid-sentence. She said the investigation could happen while I was removed from Ms. Garrett's class permanently, that there was no reason I should have to see or interact with the teacher who had assaulted me while they figured out what disciplinary action to take. The lawyer leaned over and whispered something in Hartman's ear, her face tight and worried. Hartman cleared his throat and said they could transfer me to a different PE section immediately, effective tomorrow, and that Mr. Garrett would be instructed to have no contact with me. Maria asked for that in writing, and Hartman nodded, making notes on a pad of paper. The meeting lasted 20 minutes, and when we walked out, I realized my hands had stopped shaking, because for the first time since this started, I felt like adults were actually listening and taking action. The meeting had revealed something else that made Maria's jaw tighten. Principal Hartman explained that Miss Garrett claimed she was protecting other students from my fraudulent medical note, and that I was faking my disability to avoid swimming. Maria didn't raise her voice, but her face went hard as she pulled 3 letters from her folder and slid them across the desk. Each one came from a different doctor, all on official letterhead with clinic logos and contact information printed clearly at the top. The letters explained my cochlear implants in medical terms, described the surgery I'd had when I was 3, and detailed exactly why water exposure to the processors was dangerous. One letter even included photos of the internal implant components visible on my skull x-rays. Hartman's face changed as he read through them, and the lawyer beside him started taking notes quickly. Maria asked if those looked fraudulent, and Hartman admitted they did not. 3 days later, a man named Federico Costa called our house. Maria put him on speaker, and he introduced himself as the district's official investigator assigned to handle the misconduct case. His voice sounded professional and calm, not dismissive or annoyed like I'd expected. He asked to schedule interviews with me and with student witnesses, and Maria immediately requested that everything be provided in writing, including the interview schedule and witness list. Costa agreed without hesitation and confirmed he would be interviewing at least 6 students who were present during the incident. He asked Maria to send him our documentation and said he would review everything before the interviews. After the call ended, Maria made notes about the conversation date and time, adding it to her growing timeline file. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from Josh. He said 5 other kids from pool class wanted to give statements about what they saw and asked if it was okay to share my number with them. My hands shook a little as I typed back yes. Within an hour, 3 different classmates had texted me saying they wanted to help and that what Ms. Garrett did was wrong. One girl named Ashley said she'd been scared of Ms. Garrett all semester because of how she talked about kids with accommodations. Another guy named Marcus said he recorded part of the incident on his phone before Ms. Garrett noticed. I showed Maria the messages and she smiled, saying this was good because multiple witnesses made the case stronger. For the first time since the pool, I felt less alone. Other people had seen what happened, and they believed me. 2 days after that, Derek came to the house for his regular check-in visit. Maria opened the door and let him in, but then stepped back, telling me I could show him my room and talk to him privately if I wanted. We went upstairs and Derek sat in my desk chair while I sat on my bed. He asked how I was doing and if I felt safe here with Maria. The old fear kicked in automatically because caseworker questions usually meant they were thinking about moving me. But I made myself answer honestly. I told him Maria had been amazing, that she fought for me when Ms. Garrett hurt me, and that I felt safer here than anywhere I'd lived in the foster system. Derek wrote that down in his notebook and gave me a small smile. He said he could see the placement was working well, and that he was impressed with how Maria had handled everything. He made notes about the incident being a school problem, not a placement issue, which meant I wasn't getting moved. Kenya came over that weekend to help us draft the Office for Civil Rights complaint. She spread papers across our kitchen table and explained what needed to be included. Then she surprised me by asking if I wanted to write a section in my own words about how the incident made me feel and what I needed from the school. Maria handed me a laptop and I stared at the blank document for a while before starting to type. I wrote about being scared to trust adults because so many had let me down in foster care. I wrote about how Miss Garrett proved all my worst fears right when she grabbed my processor and said Maria didn't really care about me. But then I wrote about how Maria proved that some adults actually do protect kids, that she showed up and fought for me even though I'd only been with her a few months. Kenya read what I wrote and said it was powerful, that hearing directly from students affected by discrimination made these complaints stronger. The complaint got filed officially on Monday. Kenya walked us through the online submission process and explained the timeline would be months, not weeks, because federal investigations moved slowly. But she said it created an official paper trail and put the district on notice that they were being watched. Maria printed 3 copies, one for our records, one for Derek's file, and one for her own backup system. She had a whole filing system now with color-coded folders for medical records, school correspondence, legal documents, and witness statements. I'd never seen anything like it in foster care. Usually paperwork just disappeared or got lost when you moved placements. Going back to the school felt hard. I only had one working processor and the world sounded flat and exhausting. Every classroom felt too loud on one side and too quiet on the other. My brain had to work twice as hard to process sound, and by 3rd period I was already tired. But my teachers noticed me struggling. Mrs. Schmidt let me move to a front corner seat where I could see her and the board clearly. Mr. Roberts started giving me printed copies of his lecture notes, so I didn't have to strain to hear everything. Coach Williams, my new PE teacher, asked what accommodations I needed and actually listened when I explained about my equipment. Small adjustments, but they helped me get through each day. Costa scheduled my interview for a Thursday after school. Maria came with me, and we sat in a conference room at the district office. Costa had a laptop and a legal pad covered in notes. He asked me to walk through exactly what happened that day by the pool, starting from when Missy Garrett first questioned my medical note. He wanted specific quotes, asking me to remember exactly what she said about foster parents and fake disabilities. He wrote everything down and didn't interrupt or seem skeptical. When I described her grabbing my processor, he asked me to clarify the sequence of events and whether anyone tried to stop her. I told him about Josh stepping between us and how Ms. Garrett shoved past him. Costa made detailed notes about that too. The whole interview took almost an hour, and by the end my head hurt from concentrating so hard, but Costa seemed thorough and professional, rather than dismissive. The loaner processor finally arrived 10 days after the incident. Maria drove me to the audiologist's office and I practically ran inside. The audiologist brought out an older model processor and explained it had shorter battery life and the sound quality would be different from what I was used to. She fitted it carefully, adjusting the placement and testing the connection. When she turned it on, sound flooded back into my left side. The world suddenly had depth again, even though everything sounded tinny and slightly wrong. I could hear Maria's voice clearly, and the audiologist's questions and the hum of the air conditioning. My eyes got wet and I tried to hide it, but the audiologist just smiled and said lots of people cried when their hearing came back. She gave me extra batteries and a charging case, reminding me this was temporary until we could get my real processor replaced. Maria filed the insurance claim that same day, but the company denied it within a week. Their letter said water damage wasn't covered under the equipment protection plan. Maria's face went tight as she read the denial letter out loud. She immediately called Kenya and put her on speaker. Kenya said we needed to appeal the decision and argue this wasn't accidental water damage, but third-party destruction of medical equipment. She helped Maria draft an appeal letter that included the police report number, the district investigation confirmation, and a statement from the audiologist explaining the processor was forcibly removed and thrown into water by another person. Maria sent the appeal certified mail and copied our lawyer, building a paper trail that showed we were fighting every denial and obstacle they put in our way. The district notified us 3 days later that Mrs. Garrett was on administrative leave from pool supervision while Costa finished his investigation. She still taught other classes, though, which meant I might see her in the hallways. Maria made sure I understood what administrative leave meant, and that it was temporary, not a punishment yet. The first time I saw Mrs. Garrett was on a Thursday between 3rd and 4th period. She was walking toward the main office and I was heading to English. Our eyes met for maybe half a second before she looked down at the floor and turned down a different hallway. My stomach twisted anyway. Josh appeared beside me out of nowhere and walked between me and where Mrs. Garrett had been, like he was blocking her even though she was already gone. He didn't say anything about it, but he stayed next to me until I got to my classroom door. Costa scheduled interviews with the student witnesses that same week. Josh went first on Friday morning and texted me right after his interview ended, saying he told Costa everything, including the stuff Mrs. Garrett said about foster kids not mattering and how she talked about my disability being fake before she even grabbed my processor. 2 other students from the pool class, kids I barely knew, sent me messages through Josh saying they mentioned to Costa how uncomfortable they felt watching Mrs. Garrett question whether my medical note was real. One girl said she remembered thinking it was weird that a teacher would accuse a student of lying about being disabled. The school scheduled a 504 plan meeting for the following Tuesday. I didn't know what a 504 plan was until Maria explained it was a legal document that listed all my accommodations and protections at the school. Maria took time off work to come to the meeting, and Kenya drove in from her office an hour away. We sat in a conference room with the school counselor, the special education coordinator, and Principal Hartman for over 2 hours. They asked questions about my hearing, my processors, what I needed in each class. Maria had brought a whole folder of documentation, including letters from my audiologist and copies of my device manuals. Kenya took notes on everything and asked specific questions about who was responsible for making sure teachers followed the plan. We went through every class and wrote down where I should sit, how teachers should get my attention, what to do if my equipment had problems. The special education coordinator typed everything into her laptop as we talked. When we got to the section about medical equipment, I raised my hand even though this wasn't really a classroom situation. Everyone looked at me and I felt my face get hot, but I made myself talk anyway. I said I wanted a written rule that no teacher could touch my processors for any reason, ever, no matter what. The room got quiet for a second. Then Kenya nodded and said that was an excellent self-advocacy statement, and she wanted to make sure it was in the document using those exact words. The coordinator typed it in and read it back out loud, adding language about how my medical equipment was protected under federal law, and any staff member who touched it without permission would face immediate disciplinary action. Maria reached over and squeezed my shoulder, and I could see she was proud even though she didn't say anything right then. The meeting ended with everyone signing the 504 plan and the coordinator promising to email copies to all my teachers by the end of the day. A woman I didn't know approached Maria in the school parking lot 2 days later when Maria was picking me up. The woman introduced herself as Connie McDermott from the teachers union and said she wanted to talk about the incident. Maria's whole body language changed, and she said we weren't meeting with anyone without our advocate present. Connie tried to say it would just be a quick conversation to hear Ms. Garrett's side of things, but Maria cut her off and said if the union wanted to meet, they could contact Kenya Steele and schedule something official. Connie left her card on Maria's windshield. Kenya set up a meeting for the following week in a conference room at the district office. Connie showed up with a folder and started talking about Ms. Garrett's perspective on disability fraud and how she was just trying to protect the school from fake medical notes. Maria didn't let her get very far before sliding across the table the photos of my bloody head, the medical records from urgent care, the audiologist's documentation, and the police report number. Connie's face went pale as she looked through the photos. Kenya added that this wasn't a case of a teacher questioning accommodations through proper channels. This was assault and destruction of medical equipment, and the union might want to think carefully about how much they wanted to defend that. Connie gathered up her folder and said she needed to consult with her team. 4 weeks after the incident, Costa called to schedule a preliminary findings meeting. Maria, Kenya, and I sat across from Costa and Principal Hartman in Hartman's office, while Costa read from his notes. He said multiple witnesses backed up my version of what happened, including specific quotes about Ms. Garrett saying foster parents don't care and questioning my disability. Costa had also found 2 prior informal complaints about Ms. Garrett questioning students' disabilities, though nothing had been formally written up or investigated before. One was from 3 years ago, when she told a student with diabetes that his blood sugar monitor looked fake. Another was from last year when she refused to let a student with asthma keep her inhaler during PE. Both times parents had complained to coaches or counselors, but nothing went into Miss A. Garrett's official file. Costa said his preliminary finding was that Mrs. Garrett had violated district policy on multiple grounds, and he was recommending formal disciplinary action. The final report would take another 2 weeks. Kenya had been working on the insurance appeal while all this was happening. She submitted the medical documentation, the police report number, and a detailed letter from my audiologist explaining that this was assault causing destruction of medical equipment, not accidental water damage. The insurance company's adjuster called Maria directly about a week after Costa's preliminary findings meeting. I was doing homework in the kitchen when Maria's phone rang, and she put it on speaker, so Kenya could hear too since Kenya was on her way over. The adjuster said they were reconsidering the claim based on the new documentation and the police report. They needed a few more days to review, but it looked like they would approve at least partial coverage. Maria thanked him and hung up, then immediately texted Kenya the update. I was in math class on a Wednesday when the loaner processor's battery died without warning. The world went half silent so fast that I gasped out loud and grabbed the side of my desk. My teacher noticed right away and came over asking if I was okay. I couldn't really hear her clearly with only one processor working, so I just pointed at my head and tried not to cry. She wrote on a piece of paper asking if I needed to call someone. I nodded and she walked me to the hallway and let me use the classroom phone. Maria answered on the second ring, and I told her what happened, my voice shaking. She talked me through opening my backpack and finding the battery case and changing the battery in the loaner processor. Her voice stayed calm and steady the whole time, reminding me that I was safe, and this was just a technical problem, not another attack. When the new battery clicked in and sound came back, I felt like I could breathe again. Maria stayed on the phone for another minute, making sure I was really okay before letting me go back to class. My teacher had already explained to the other students that I had a medical device issue, and everyone was cool about it when I came back in. The school board met on the third Thursday of every month, and Maria said we should make a public comment about what happened. Kenya helped me write a statement that was exactly 3 minutes long when I practiced reading it out loud. The night of the meeting, Maria and I sat in the audience with Kenya until the public comment period started. My hands shook as I walked up to the microphone at the front of the room. I read my statement about feeling unsafe at the school and wanting better protection for students with disabilities, so this wouldn't happen to someone else. I talked about how Mrs. Garrett destroyed my medical equipment and questioned whether I was really disabled, and how the school needed stronger policies to protect kids like me. Several board members took notes while I was talking, and one woman nodded when I mentioned medical equipment protection. When I finished and sat back down, Maria squeezed my hand, and Kenya whispered that I did great. 2 days after the board meeting, the district's lawyer called Maria to offer a settlement meeting. Maria put him on speaker with Kenya listening in. The lawyer started talking about a financial settlement to cover the destroyed processor and medical bills. Maria interrupted and said we weren't interested in money, we wanted policy changes and accountability for what happened. The lawyer sounded surprised and asked what we meant by policy changes. Kenya listed out our demands, including mandatory disability rights training for all staff, explicit policies protecting students' medical equipment, and formal documentation of the disciplinary action against Mrs. Garrett. The lawyer said he would need to discuss remedial measures with the district administration and get back to us about scheduling a follow-up meeting to talk about policy changes instead of money. Costa's report came back 3 weeks later, and Maria opened the email while I was doing homework at the kitchen table. She read through it twice before showing me the screen, and I saw words like substantiated and inappropriate physical contact and discriminatory statements highlighted in the document. Principal Hartman called that afternoon to schedule a meeting about outcomes, and Maria put him on speaker while writing down the date and time in her planner. The meeting happened on a Tuesday morning, and Maria pulled me out of third period to sit in Hartman's office with Kenya beside us. Hartman had papers spread across his desk, and he explained that Mrs. Garrett would receive a formal letter of reprimand that would go in her permanent file, and she'd have to complete mandatory training on disability rights and medical equipment handling. He said she was being permanently removed from teaching any students with documented accommodations, which meant she couldn't have kids with 504 plans or IEPS in her classes anymore. Maria asked what happens if she doesn't comply, and Hartman said there would be quarterly check-ins to monitor the situation, and any violations would lead to further disciplinary action. It wasn't termination, but Kenya squeezed my shoulder and whispered that this was actually a big deal, because it limited what Missy Garrett could do and created a paper trail if she messed up again. 2 days after that meeting, the insurance company called Maria and said they were approving a partial reimbursement of $5,000 for the destroyed processor. Maria had me on speaker when the adjuster explained that the manufacturer was also offering a discount program for assault victims that would cover another $2,500. Maria worked out a payment plan for the remaining $500, and she told the adjuster she wanted to pay it herself instead of having the school cover it because she wanted the paper trail to show exactly what happened and who was responsible. The audiologist called the next day to say my new processor was ordered and would arrive in about 2 weeks, and I went straight to my room to mark the date on the calendar hanging above my desk. Maria came in later and saw the circle I'd drawn around the delivery date, and she added a little note that said Celebration Day with a smiley face next to it. The 504 plan meeting happened that Friday, and the whole team sat around a conference table going through every section of the document. They added explicit protections about my medical equipment, including rules that no teacher could touch my processors for any reason, and communication accommodations like preferential seating and access to written notes. Kenya helped write a safety plan for what to do if I ever felt targeted again, including who to contact and what steps to take, and I signed my copy at the bottom where it said student signature. Maria took it to the office supply store that weekend and got it laminated in thick plastic, and she told me to keep it in my backpack always so I'd have proof of my rights. Derek showed up for his quarterly check-in the following Tuesday, and he sat with me in the living room asking his standard questions about how I was doing and if I felt safe. I told him about the investigation and the outcomes meeting and how Maria had been with me through everything, and he wrote it all down in his tablet. He talked to Maria separately in the kitchen, and I heard him say something about exceptional advocacy, and when he left, he told me he was recommending the placement continue long-term, which made my chest feel warm in a way I wasn't used to. At the school the next day, Josh waved me over to his lunch table where he sat with the other guys from the football team, and when I sat down, one of them asked about my processor. I explained what happened without feeling like I needed to hide anything, and this kid named Marcus said his sister has a hearing aid, and their mom would have completely lost it if a teacher touched it. Everyone at the table agreed Mrs. Garrett was totally wrong, and Josh changed the subject to the upcoming game like it was just a normal conversation. Kenya emailed Maria a memo from the school district about new mandatory training for all staff on disability rights and medical equipment, and the memo specifically cited my case as the reason for the policy change. Maria printed it out and added it to our documentation binder, and I saw her smile as she filed it away in the cabinet. A letter arrived in the mail a few days later with the district lawyer's return address, and Maria opened it to find a formal apology from Mrs. Garrett typed on official letterhead. Maria asked if I wanted to read it, and I thought about it for a minute before saying no, because her words didn't matter anymore. And what mattered was the changes that happened, because I spoke up. The new processor arrived exactly 2 weeks after it was ordered, and Maria drove me to the audiologist's office after school. The audiologist opened the box carefully and showed me the device before fitting it to my head and adjusting all the settings on her computer. She tested different frequencies and volumes until the sound quality was clear and balanced on both sides, and I felt tears in my eyes when I could hear properly again. Maria took a photo of me smiling with the new processor attached, and she said she wanted to remember this moment. That evening at home, Maria spread papers across the kitchen table and pulled out a chair for me. The warranty registration form sat on top with about 20 blank fields and tiny print instructions. She handed me a pen and pointed to the first section, asking for device serial number and purchase date. I looked at the box the processor came in and copied the numbers carefully while Maria watched me write. She didn't fill anything out herself, but sat beside me and explained what each section meant and why they needed that information. The insurance documentation was thicker with questions about medical necessity and provider information, and I had to look up codes from my audiologist's paperwork. Maria showed me where to find everything in our binder and how to match the codes to the right boxes. My hand cramped after the third page, but I kept going because she said I needed to know how to do this myself. She explained that adults with disabilities had to handle their own paperwork all the time, and the sooner I learned, the easier my life would be. I signed my name at the bottom of the last form, and Maria checked my work before putting everything in stamped envelopes. She let me walk them to the mailbox at the end of our street, and I felt proud dropping them in, even though it was just paperwork. 2 days later, Maria asked if I wanted to go somewhere after school, and I said sure without asking where. She drove to the school and parked near the gym, and my chest got tight when I realized where we were going. The pool area was empty because PE classes had ended an hour ago. Maria walked in first, and I followed her to the bleachers where we sat down in the quiet space. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat, and my hands started sweating. The pool water looked normal and calm without anyone in it. I stared at the spot where my processor had sunk and felt my breathing speed up. Maria didn't say anything, but she sat close enough that our shoulders touched. I counted to 60 in my head 3 times while we sat there, and my heart rate slowly came back down. We stayed for 15 minutes, and then Maria asked if I was ready to go. I nodded, and we walked out together, and I felt shaky, but okay. She didn't make it a big deal or ask how I felt. She just drove us home and started making dinner like we'd done something normal. The next Monday, Principal Hartman called me to his office over the intercom during math class. My stomach dropped and I gathered my stuff with shaking hands because office calls usually meant bad news. I walked down the hallway expecting the worst. Hartman's secretary waved me in and he stood up from his desk when I entered. He gestured to a chair and I sat down stiffly. Hartman cleared his throat and said he wanted to apologize personally for not protecting me better during the incident. He explained the district had implemented new policies about medical equipment and disability accommodations. Teachers couldn't touch or question medical devices anymore without serious consequences. He asked if I felt safer now with the changes. I thought about it for a minute before answering honestly that I did feel safer mostly. Some days I still tensed up around teachers I didn't know well, but it was getting better. Hartman nodded and said his door was always open if I needed anything. He handed me a pass back to class and I left feeling lighter than when I'd walked in. Kenya called Maria that afternoon with news about the OCR complaint. I sat on the couch doing homework while Maria put her on speaker. Kenya explained the district had agreed to revise all their policies on medical equipment and disability accommodations as part of a formal settlement. The agreement included mandatory training for staff and clear procedures for handling medical needs. Kenya said this would create precedent that protected other students beyond just me. I felt something warm spread through my chest, knowing that what happened to me might stop it from happening to someone else. Maria thanked Kenya for all her help, and I added my thanks too. After the call ended, Maria printed out the settlement agreement and added it to our documentation binder. She showed me the section that specifically mentioned policies around cochlear implants and other medical devices. Derek showed up Thursday afternoon for what he called a routine check-in. He sat with Maria at the kitchen table while I finished my snack. He pulled out paperwork about extending my foster placement, and Maria read through it carefully. Then she did something I didn't expect. She looked at me and asked if I wanted her to pursue adoption eventually. My throat got tight and I couldn't answer right away. Derek waited patiently while I processed the question. I told her I wasn't ready to answer yet, but my voice came out shaky. Maria nodded and said that was completely okay, and we had time to figure it out. The fact that she asked me instead of just deciding made me feel like my opinion actually mattered. Derek made notes on his tablet and said he'd check in again next month. After he left, Maria hugged me and said there was no pressure, and we'd talk about it whenever I was ready. A letter arrived in Saturday's mail addressed to Maria from Josh's mom. Maria opened it at the kitchen table and read it with a surprised smile. She handed it to me, and I read the thank you note about raising me to stand up for myself. It felt weird because I'd only been with Maria for a few months. The note said Josh had told his mom everything about the pool incident and how I'd handled it. Josh's mom wrote that she was grateful Maria was teaching me to advocate for myself. Maria showed me the note again and said she was proud of how brave I'd been through everything. I looked at her face and realized I actually believed her when she said it. She wasn't just saying words to make me feel better. She meant it. My therapy appointment Tuesday afternoon was different because my therapist had a new assignment. She asked me to write a letter to my future self about what I'd been through. I stared at the blank paper for a while before starting. I wrote about being scared when Missy Garrett grabbed my processor and how terrified I was that speaking up would get me sent away. I wrote about learning that sometimes adults actually listen and protect you. I wrote about Maria and how she showed up and stayed. My therapist read it when I finished and said to keep it somewhere safe. She explained that if I ever doubted myself again, I should read this letter and remember how strong I'd been. I folded it carefully and put it in my backpack. The school year ended 3 weeks later and I passed all my classes. My teachers had been understanding about the time I missed dealing with everything. My report card came in the mail, and Maria opened it at the kitchen table. She read through the grades and then the teacher comments on the back. They'd written notes about my resilience and growth. Maria got up and stuck the report card on the refrigerator with a magnet like I was a regular kid whose grades deserved to be displayed. I stood there looking at it and felt something shift inside my chest. Maria took me shopping for summer clothes on Saturday morning. We went to the mall and she let me pick out shorts and shirts I actually liked. Then she asked if I wanted to look at waterproof cases for my processor. We found them at an electronics store and I looked through the options. The cases came in different colors and sizes. I picked a bright blue one that was impossible to miss. Maria said it was perfect, and we bought it along with the clothes. Holding that case felt like taking back something Miss Garrett had tried to steal. I could go swimming now without fear. The blue case sat on my dresser at home, and every time I looked at it I felt a little bit stronger. My phone buzzed with a text from Josh 3 days before the 4th of July. He invited me to his family's barbecue and said there would be swimming and food. I found Maria in the living room and asked if it was okay to go. She smiled and said of course and offered to drive me there. She treated it like the normal teenage social event it was. No big deal. No making it weird. Just a regular kid going to a regular party. I texted Josh back that I'd be there. The 4th of July came hot and bright. Maria drove me to Josh's house and his family had set up tables in the backyard with a grill smoking and a pool that looked perfect. I grabbed my bright blue waterproof case from my bag and felt the weight of it in my hand, solid and real. Josh waved me over, and I walked through the yard past his parents and aunts and uncles who smiled but didn't stare. The pool was full of kids already splashing around, and I clipped my processor into the case, checked the seal twice, and jumped in. The water was cold and clean, and nobody asked me weird questions about why I was wearing the blue case on my head. Josh's little sister swam over and pointed at my processor through the clear plastic. She asked if it was like a robot ear, and I explained how the microphone picked up sounds and sent signals to my brain. She thought that was cool, and asked if I could hear underwater, and I told her not really, just like everyone else. We played Marco Polo, and I could hear people calling out with my one working processor, and it felt normal, like just being a kid at a pool party. After swimming, I dried off and found Maria sitting on the back porch with Josh's mom, both of them drinking lemonade and watching the yard. I sat down on the steps, and Maria came over and sat beside me. She asked how I was really doing with everything that happened. I told her some days were still hard, and I got nervous around teachers sometimes, but I was learning to trust that she would back me up, and that made things easier. She nodded and didn't push for more, just sat there with me while the sun dried my hair. Later that evening, when we were getting ready to leave, I was helping Maria carry dishes to the car, and I called out asking where she wanted me to put them. The word came out without thinking. Mom. Not foster mom, just mom. I froze for a second, but Maria just smiled with her eyes getting shiny, and she took the dishes and set them down and hugged me. She said she loved me too, and I hugged her back, really hugged her, and it felt right. The rest of summer passed with me getting used to calling her mom, and her never making it weird or correcting me. When August rolled around and school supply shopping started, I felt different from I had in May. The new processor sat charged on my dresser, and my 504 plan was printed and tucked in my backpack. The first day of school, I walked through the front doors, and Josh was already at my locker waiting like he'd promised over text. He asked if I was good, and I told him, yeah, I was good. We walked to first period together, and I noticed Miss Garrett wasn't in the hallway or the gym. Someone mentioned she was teaching at a different school across town now. I realized I wasn't scared anymore because I knew how to speak up, and I had people who would actually listen.